it was a stone. Look, it's got a note tied to it.
Silly little woman, I told her to stop writing me.
Asta, drop that. Asta, drop that. That's a clue. Oh, he thinks we're playing. Nicky, come help me. Look at him.
Huh? Where is he?
Over there.
ご機嫌いかがですか？渡辺Danです。On today's episode of Alt Cinema, we're going to be taking a look at After the Thin Man, the 1936 sequel to The Thin Man, a 1934 movie that had been a surprise sleeper hit for MGM. The reason it was a surprise sleeper hit is because it was considered kind of a movie that its two stars, William Powell and Myrna Loy, were making in between their other quote-unquote more important pictures. Based on the novel by Dashiell Hammett, which would prove to be the last novel he would write, or he would at least complete, the movie was a very, very frothy detective thriller. It featured a detective, Nick Charles, played by William Powell, who used to be a tough guy. He used to hang around the Bas-Fond and dealt with all sorts of underworld criminals. Somewhere along the line, he had met Nora and had married her. And she had been an heiress, so of course he moved up in society and pretty much retired until he was called upon, perhaps unwittingly, to get involved in the murder scheme again. The movie itself is very, very frothy and light. There were ultimately 5 sequels to The Thin Man. After the Thin Man is actually my favorite of these sequels. And there's always been some feeling that After the Thin Man was a little bit of a disappointment after the first one, if for no other reason that any sequel is sometimes a disappointment after the first one. I'm going to say that After the Thin Man is actually the superior movie. Now, this is not to say that I don't love The Thin Man. I do. I think it's witty and it's fast and it's sassy and it has all of those elements. But After the Thin Man added to that another level. It added a level of seriousness and social conscience, which is actually kind of surprising in the armchair detective genre, which is more or less known for being rather light and taking place among mainly the gentry. But no, After the Thin Man explores Nick's past life in a way that The Thin Man did not. And in the process of exploring his past life, we get to see a much greater contrast between the life Nick is living now versus the life he had in the past. And it also introduces a very strong element of Nora's family. And we see that their marriage, although clearly a highly sexual and clearly one that satisfies the two of them, I mean, they finish each other's sentences, they're a very, very complete couple. But it was a marriage that her family did not approve of, nor would anyone expect them to. After all, he was a guy from the streets. They were from the San Francisco gentry. Why should they be happy that a daughter of such an august grouping should be running off with a guy who's a mere gumshoe? But, of course, when something goes wrong with the family, who are they the first to call on? And the family right now is in the middle of what can only be described as an existential crisis. Taking place right after the first Thin Man has ended, Nick and Nora are returning to San Francisco to celebrate New Year's. And it looks like a party that none of them really wants to attend because that means they're going to be with the waxworks, the old folks. But there's a problem that's going on. Her cousin Selma, played by Alyssa Landy, who had more recently been seen in Sign of the Cross as one of the victims, is having marital problems of the worst sort. Her husband has left her. The family wants to keep it as quiet as humanly possible. But Selma, worse than anything else, has allowed her emotions about her abandonment to become public. She's still madly in love with her husband, and she will do anything to be with him. This causes her Aunt Catherine to be absolutely beside herself, to the point where she's willing to have Nicholas join the family so that she can get their help. Now she doesn't want, and Catherine does not want Selma to tell what's really happening. She wants to kind of put a nice face on it. But there's no way you can put a nice face on the fact that your husband's been gone for 3 days and might be hanging out with a hoochie coochie dancer from the nightclub. And so ultimately the story all comes out. And it comes out that Selma is still in love with her husband, no matter what he does. She knows she's going to take him back. The phone rings, and she's anxious to answer it. This is a seriousness that we don't see in many realistic dramas. And yet, it's still being played in the context of a very, very light detective mystery. But it's going to get darker still. Jimmy Stewart plays David Graham, and he's someone who's that good guy that Selma should have married, but she didn't. You know why? Because he's boring. He's boring and uninteresting. Why is he boring and uninteresting? Simply because he comes from money. He's not someone who had that edge. We see in this case that maybe one of the reasons that Aunt Catherine doesn't like Nicholas much is because he reminds her of the marriage that her daughter has had. And she sees the harm it's caused her, and she doesn't want Nora to go through it. So all of a sudden, Aunt Catherine's machinations no longer seem quite so bad either. But David is someone that we're going to watch. He's perhaps a little bit too solicitous. He's perhaps a little bit too forgiving. He drops a hint that he's been in love with Selma too.
You can't indefinitely go on caring for somebody who doesn't care for you, can you?
Well, it's been done.
Nick and Nora head over to the Lychee Club, which is where Robert, Selma's husband, is supposedly hanging out. And yes, indeed, we see that he is very, very hooked on a singer named Polly, who's played by Penny Singleton, who would go on to great success playing Blondie. Here we see her with her natural colored hair and under her original name, Dorothy Nuthington. And we see that she is a singer. We understand why the public likes her, and we probably understand why Robert likes her too. For one thing, she's not whiny the way Selma is. For another, she has that same kind of street smart that he had left and had found lacking in his life. He's not someone like Nick who's enjoying clipping coupons. He's someone who wants to have that free libertine existence. So we get to see that within this nightclub, a hodgepodge of other characters. These are all underworld types. These are all not the type of people that Aunt Catherine would approve of Nora hanging out with, but she hangs with them very, very well. In fact, they all get to like her and consider her pretty much one of the guys, because she's willing to try to even drink Nick under the table at one point. And we also meet some of the other denizens of the club, including a Chinese henchman whom it turns out that Nick had sent up his brother. So there might be some uncomfortableness there. We see Dancer, played by Joseph Kaea, a Maltese actor, who would always play these kind of heavies, who had an interesting side to them. They weren't just normal thugs. And even his name, Dancer, suggests that there's a part of him that had other aspirations before he accepted this type of underworld life. Sure enough, they run into Robert, and Robert is completely not interested in going back to Selma. And seeing the people in the nightclub, we kind of agree with him. David, in fact, shows up at the club, and he is willing to give Robert money in order for Robert to leave forever. Robert is cool with that. He and Polly are going to run away. Robert doesn't realize, though, that Polly has a brother who's trying to shake her down for money too. So, is there anyone in this underworld that isn't in some way on a take or on a scam? And we're going to find out as the story develops. No, the answer is no. What happens is that Robert returns to pack up his things. Selma once again throws herself at him. And I've got to say, Lisa Landis is not the right actress for this role. She's so whiny that you want to really smack her. She's not someone that you feel sympathy for. She's someone that you feel almost contempt for, because with everyone else being so cool around her, for her being such a dry dish rag, makes her the least likable character among all the people that we're dealing with. Anyway, Robert leaves and is promptly shot. And Selma, who had followed after him with a gun, not that she would use it, not that she even know how to use it, is there too, right behind him. So we don't know if she indeed shot him. Fortunately, David's there, and he offers to help her get rid of the gun. He, in fact, apparently throws it in the river. And this is going to lead to a problem later because now Selma is going to be accused of the murder. Nick and Nora get involved with the case from this point, and they start interviewing a lot of the other people. And by the end, we realize, of course, that David is the one who has been doing it. David, who was insanely jealous, who was in his own way just like Selma, not able to get over her, not willing to be forgiving, willing to be vengeful.
You don't have to pretend anymore.
All right, it's true, every word of it. I've hated her, hated them both ever since she threw me over for Robert. I've been planning and waiting and watching for the time to come when I could get even with them for ruining my life. I killed Robert, but not the way I wanted to. It was too quick, too easy. I wanted to see him suffer like he'd made me suffer.
Watching James Stewart descend into sheer madness is not what we expect of him. We're used to seeing Jimmy Stewart as the nice guy, as the guy who's conciliatory. But remember, he would later play a lot of more nefarious characters and even villains in especially westerns like Shenandoah, and so we get that, and Rear Window and the Alfred Hitchcock movies. They were tapping into the dark side of Jimmy Stewart. And we see here that he is capable of going there, that he's capable of using his aw shucks looks to hide his heart of darkness. Now, let's get to the other element of this movie that was absolutely transgressive for the time, and that is Nick and Nora's dog, Asta. And what is it about Asta? Well, Asta's story is absolutely mirroring the main story. And Asta, who has been traveling around with Nick and Nora, living the high life in Manhattan, returns home to his wife and his kids. And among the kids, we see that there's a black puppy. And neither Asta nor his wife are black. And then what happens? We see a dog come from the yard next door. And we see that Asta is jealous the same way Robert and Selma were. We see him, rather than resorting to murder, doing other extreme acts, such as moving the lawnmower in front of the hole that the other dog came through. We see that Asta, too, can go through the same things the humans are going through. And while we laugh at it, we're also keenly aware that this class system, that this particular episode of The Thin Man explores, is one that makes it a lot richer than the original and a lot more satisfying as a whole. The movie ends with Nora pretty much letting Nick know that she's about to have a baby, and that their life is going to take another turn, which in fact will become the subject of the remaining 4 films in the series. And it is because of the addition of the kid that I feel that those back 4 movies are somehow less satisfying than this one.
And you call yourself a detective?
Why, Mrs. Charles.